Every child that's gone to church camp, or VBS has heard of the story of Jonah. He is the dude who did not want to follow God's command to preach to Nineveh, so he fled on a ship, was cast overboard, and eaten by a giant fish. And then he came to his senses, God spared him, and he went to Nineveh and preached to them, and they repented, and everyone lived happily ever after.
Absolutely, but not really.
One thing many people don't realize is that Jonah is a satire, using humor, irony, and exaggeration to expose and criticize people's stupidity and vices. Let me show you how it's satire. Jonah is portrayed as being a completely idiotic prophet, while literally everything else is portrayed as being obedient to God. First of all, he doesn't respond to the call of God at the beginning of the book to go preach to Nineveh. Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all the other prophets who are called by Yahweh all respond, even though they usually have an initial excuse. Jonah just flat out rejects God and does the exact opposite of what God commanded. Second, he gets on a boat to go to the end of the known world in the exact opposite direction of Nineveh, thinking that God won't find him there. And also notice that this is the only person in the entire Old Testament that is known to get on a boat. So that alone should tell you how significant this is. Third, the sailors are portrayed as more devout than Jonah because they are urging him to pray to his God.
At least you can pray to your God!
Instead of sleeping. They also know that it is because of God that the storm has occurred. So these pagan sailors are more devout than a prophet of Yahweh. Fourth, when God appoints a giant fish, the fish obeys him unlike his own prophet. Fifth, Jonah preaches one crappy sermon, a whole 5 Hebrew words, and Nineveh repents at it. Jonah might not have been trying very hard when he was preaching, and he probably was hoping that they wouldn't repent. Another element of humor that is included is that the king of Nineveh commanded the cows to repent at these 5 Hebrew words.
Moo! 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 A mooey! Moo!
Sixth, God commands a plant, a worm, and a scorching wind to do his bidding, and all 3 obey him, yet Jonah did not. Seventh, Jonah gets upset about a plant dying, but yet he wants a huge city to be destroyed in fire and brimstone.
Bring down your judgment! Now!
Obviously, the biblical authors are trying to portray Jonah as a complete idiot in a funny and ironic way. While this story may be funny and bizarre, the point of the satire is not to tell you about a guy getting swallowed by a giant sea monster. The point of the satire of Jonah is to show the similarities between you and the buffoon prophet. It exaggerates to show very clearly how idiotic he is, but there are points in the story where we as readers can clearly identify with Jonah. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria, and Assyria was like the froggy fresh of the ancient world, the baddest of them all.
I am the baddest of them all.
They ripped out people's tongues, they ripped off people's skin while they were still alive, they cut off their hands and feet and stuck a pole up their rectum or perineum and let gravity do its work so that after several days of slowly being impaled by a stick, they would finally die. And they did this all to intimidate their enemies. Could we really blame Jonah for wanting these people to suffer for the sin that they committed? How many of us would want radical Islamic terrorists to suffer the same fate as Sodom and Gomorrah? On the other hand, how many of us would want these people who bullied us our entire lives to never suffer any punishment for their wickedness? Jonah can help us to see how this mindset is utterly ridiculous, even though it is almost second nature for most humans. We should want our enemies to be forgiven and to worship the Lord. So perhaps we are more like Jonah than we first imagined. Let's just try not to stay that way.